A forbidden romance spiraled into chaos. Find out how one night changed everything. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Sophie had always believed she lived a charmed life. At 32, she had a prestigious job as a marketing executive, a beautiful house in the suburbs, and a husband, Daniel, who was the very definition of success. Their life together, on the outside, was picture perfect. Friends envied their lifestyle, and Sophie found comfort in the stability of their marriage. But beneath this veneer of perfection, there was an undercurrent of unease Sophie couldn't quite explain. It was subtle at first: late nights at work, Daniel's increasing detachment, and the sterile conversations over dinner. One evening, after yet another cold exchange over what should have been a romantic dinner, Sophie sat alone in the dark, swirling her wine glass. She looked around the house they'd built together and felt the hollowness that echoed through every room. Sophie missed the warmth, the passion, and the connection they once had. It had been months since they'd spent a night laughing or even talking about something other than work or household logistics. The loneliness gnawed at her, growing with each passing day. The following week, Sophie received an invitation to a company conference in a nearby city. Normally, she would have declined, eager to spend the weekend with Daniel. But this time, the thought of leaving their icy home was too tempting. Maybe the distance would help her clear her mind, or, at the very least, offer a distraction from the disintegration of her marriage. As she packed her suitcase, she couldn't shake the feeling that this trip would change everything, though she had no idea just how right she was. Chapter 2. The Stranger at the Bar. The conference was held at a luxurious hotel with all the finest amenities. But Sophie couldn't focus on the event. Her mind was consumed with thoughts of Daniel, wondering if he even noticed her absence. The text messages she sent him were met with terse replies, if he responded at all. The growing void between them felt like an abyss. On the second night of the conference, Sophie found herself wandering to the hotel bar after the day's events. She wasn't looking for company, just a quiet place to gather her thoughts and maybe enjoy a drink before heading back to her room. But as she sat at the bar, a voice interrupted her solitude. Rough day. Sophie glanced to her side and saw a man sitting a few stools down. He was handsome, in a rugged sort of way, with a sharp jawline and piercing green eyes. His suit was well-fitted but casual, and there was an air of confidence about him. "I've had better," Sophie replied, not in the mood for small talk, but too polite to brush him off. "Same here," he said, sliding over to the seat next to her. "I'm Luke, by the way." "Sophie," she responded, offering a half-hearted smile. As they talked, something about Luke drew Sophie in. His charm was effortless, his laugh infectious. He asked questions about her work, her life, her passions, and for the first time in months, Sophie felt like someone was truly listening. He made her feel seen in a way Daniel hadn't for a long time. Hours passed, and before she knew it, the bar was closing. Luke offered to walk her to her room, and though she knew it was a bad idea, she didn't stop him. When they reached her door, there was a moment of charged silence. She could feel the pull between them, but instead of giving in, she shook her head. "I can't," Sophie whispered, though part of her wanted nothing more than to forget everything and fall into Luke's arms. Luke smiled, a knowing glint in his eye. "I get it. Good night, Sophie." She watched as he walked away, her heart racing. That night, Sophie lay awake, torn between the guilt of her attraction to Luke and the deepening frustration with her crumbling marriage. Chapter 3. Unanswered Questions. Returning home after the conference, Sophie felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Daniel was waiting for her, but their reunion was cold, almost mechanical. He kissed her on the cheek and asked how the conference was, but there was no real interest in his voice. His mind was somewhere else, as it always seemed to be these days. The next few weeks were more of the same, distant conversations, late nights at the office, and an increasing sense that they were living parallel lives. Sophie tried to bridge the gap between them, suggesting they take a weekend trip or have a quiet dinner, but Daniel always had an excuse. Work was too busy, or he was too tired. The more she tried, the more it seemed to push him further away. One evening, while Daniel was still at the office, Sophie found herself scrolling through her phone and saw a message from Luke. They hadn't spoken since the night at the hotel bar, but seeing his name brought back the flutter of excitement she'd felt that night. "Hey, Sophie." Just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. Her fingers hovered over the screen. She shouldn't reply. She knew that. But the pull was too strong. After all, it was just a message. What harm could it do? They began exchanging messages, first innocently enough, but slowly the conversation became more personal. Luke made her laugh, made her feel alive. He filled the void that Daniel had left, even if it was just through words on a screen. But as Sophie became more emotionally invested in Luke, she couldn't shake the guilt that lingered in the back of her mind. She knew this was dangerous territory, and yet she couldn't stop herself from walking down that path. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Night. Late one evening, after another exhausting day at work, Sophie sat on the couch, her phone buzzing in her hand. She stared at the screen, where Luke's name flashed, and contemplated her next move. She knew her conversations with him had crossed a line, but she couldn't deny how much she enjoyed their connection. Just then, the door opened and Daniel walked in. He looked tired, as usual, but there was something different about him tonight. Sophie could see it in the way he avoided her gaze, in the tension in his shoulders. "How was work?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," he muttered, heading straight to the kitchen. Sophie followed, feeling a strange sense of unease. "Are you okay? You seem distracted." Daniel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Just a lot on my mind, Sophie." Before she could press further, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it quickly and then turned it face down. The action was so quick, so subtle, but Sophie caught it. A cold wave of suspicion washed over her. "Who was that?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No one," Daniel said too quickly. "Just work." But Sophie wasn't convinced. She hadn't been for a while. Something was going on, and she could feel it in her bones. The question was, what? Chapter 5. The Other Woman. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She had never been the jealous type, but Daniel's sudden change in behavior gnawed at her. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, everything pointed to one thing, but she didn't want to believe it. Not yet, she needed proof. The next day, while Daniel was at work, Sophie did something she never thought she'd do. She went through his phone. She knew his passcode, though he didn't know she did, and it only took her a moment to unlock it. Her heart raced as she scrolled through his messages. Most of them were work-related, mundane. But then she found a string of texts from an unfamiliar number. The conversations were short but intimate enough to send a chill down her spine. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Missed you." Her breath caught in her throat. There it was, in black and white. Her worst fear had been realized. Daniel was having an affair. For a moment, Sophie didn't know what to do. Her hands shook as she put the phone down, trying to make sense of what she had just discovered. The man she had built her life with, the man she had trusted, was betraying her. That evening, when Daniel came home, Sophie played it cool. She didn't confront him. Not yet. She needed time to process everything. But the knowledge of his infidelity burned inside her, poisoning every word they exchanged. Chapter 6. A Dangerous Game. Sophie's conversations with Luke became more frequent, and though they never discussed Daniel or her marriage, the unspoken tension between them grew. Luke didn't pry, but Sophie suspected he knew there was more to her life than she was letting on. And perhaps that was part of the allure. Luke was an escape, a fantasy she could indulge in without the complications of reality. One night, after a particularly heated exchange of texts, Sophie impulsively suggested they meet again. This time, it wasn't for a work conference. She didn't care what excuse she had to make to Daniel. She needed to see Luke. They met at a hotel halfway between their cities. The moment Sophie saw him again, all her doubts melted away. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and for the first time in months, she felt truly alive. But as they sat in the dimly lit hotel room, sharing a bottle of wine, Sophie couldn't ignore the guilt gnawing at her. She was no better than Daniel now, entangled in a web of lies and deceit. After an evening of deep conversation, stolen kisses, and restrained passion, Sophie realized something. She was playing a dangerous game, not just with her marriage, but with her heart. Chapter 7. Secrets Revealed. Back home, the tension between Sophie and Daniel reached a boiling point. He was distant and she was resentful, each hiding their own secrets. One evening, unable to take the silence any longer, Sophie decided to confront him. She chose her moment carefully. After dinner, when they were both sitting in the living room, the television flickering in the background. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. Daniel glanced up, surprised by the seriousness in her tone. "About what?" "About us, about where we're headed," Sophie said, her eyes locking with his, "and about what's really going on." For a moment, Daniel looked like he might deny everything, but then something shifted in his expression. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sophie, I didn't want to hurt you." Those words confirmed everything. Her suspicions, the messages, it was all true. Daniel had been unfaithful. "Who is she?" Sophie demanded, her voice trembling with anger. Daniel hesitated. "It's not what you think. It's complicated." But Sophie didn't care about the excuses. She had heard enough. The betrayal was too deep, the pain too raw. She didn't need to know the details. Just knowing that he had lied to her was enough to shatter the trust between them. That night, Sophie packed a bag and left. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away from him, from the life they had built on lies. Chapter 8. The Unexpected Twist. Sophie checked into a small inn on the outskirts of town, unsure of what to do next. She had thought about calling Luke, but something stopped her. As much as she wanted to escape into his arms, she knew she couldn't keep running from her problems. The next morning, as Sophie sat in her room, sipping coffee and trying to piece together the shattered fragments of her life, she received an unexpected phone call. It was from Daniel. "Sophie, we need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "There's something I haven't told you." Sophie hesitated, unsure if she was ready to hear more of his lies. But something in his voice made her agree to meet him. They arranged to meet at a nearby cafe. When Sophie arrived, she found Daniel already there, looking more tired and worn than she had ever seen him. He didn't look like the confident, successful man she had married. He looked broken. "What is it, Daniel?" Sophie asked, sitting across from him. He took a deep breath. "The woman, the one I've been seeing, she's not who you think she is." Sophie frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Daniel glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening. "Her name is Emily, but she's not just someone I'm having an affair with. She's blackmailing me." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "What? Why?" "I got involved in something I shouldn't have, something illegal. Emily found out, and now she's threatening to expose everything unless I pay her." Sophie sat back, stunned. This wasn't the confession she had expected. Suddenly, everything took a darker turn. Her husband's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous. Chapter 9. Into the Abyss. Sophie didn't know what to believe. Daniel had lied to her for months, and now he was spinning a story about blackmail and illegal dealings. But as much as she wanted to walk away, something about the fear in his eyes made her stay. "What did you do, Daniel?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel hesitated, his eyes pleading with her for understanding. "I made some bad investments. I was desperate to make more money, and I got involved with some dangerous people. I thought I could handle it, but now I'm in over my head." Sophie's mind raced. This wasn't just about their marriage anymore. This was about survival. If Daniel was telling the truth, they were both in danger. "What does Emily want?" Sophie asked. "She wants more money. Money I don't have," Daniel admitted. "I've already paid her once, but now she's asking for more. If I don't pay, she's going to the police." Sophie's hands trembled as she processed what he was saying. She had been so focused on Daniel's betrayal that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. Now, she was caught in the middle of a dangerous game that could destroy them both. Chapter 10. The Final Betrayal. In the days that followed, Sophie found herself pulled deeper into the web of lies and deceit that had consumed her life. She and Daniel were no longer husband and wife. They were partners in a desperate attempt to stay afloat in a sea of treachery. But as they tried to figure out how to deal with Emily, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Daniel had lied before, and she wasn't sure if she could trust him now. Was he really a victim in all of this, or was he hiding something even darker? One evening, after another tense conversation with Daniel, Sophie decided to take matters into her own hands. She tracked down Emily's address and went to confront her. When Sophie arrived, she found Emily waiting for her, as if she had expected her all along. Emily was younger than Sophie had imagined, with sharp features and an air of confidence that made Sophie uneasy. "You're here to make a deal, aren't you?" Emily said, smirking. "I'm here to get answers," Sophie replied, standing her ground. Emily laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You're not the first woman to come to me, Sophie, but I'll tell you the same thing I told them. You can't win. Daniel's been lying to you from the beginning." Sophie's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Emily leaned in, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Daniel didn't just make bad investments. He's been embezzling money for years. He thought he could get away with it, but I found out. And now I'm going to make sure he pays." Sophie's world crumbled around her. Everything she had believed, everything she had fought for, it was all a lie. The man she had married wasn't just unfaithful. He was a criminal. As Sophie stood there, staring at the woman who had shattered her life, she realized that the final betrayal wasn't Daniel's affair. It was the fact that he had dragged her into his world of deceit, leaving her to pick up the pieces. With a sinking heart, Sophie turned and walked away, knowing that her life would never be the same again.